It didn't come from Beijing. It didn't come from Brussels. It didn't even come from the Kremlin. It came from two Caribbean capitals, Port of Spain and Kingston. Cities that are rarely mentioned in superpower headlines, places often associated with beaches and music, not high-stakes geopolitics. Yet in 2025, these two nations did something unthinkable. They made Washington listen, not with noise, but with nerve. There were no street protests, no angry mobs waving placards, no flashy documentaries or global media campaigns. Instead, Trinidad and Jamaica responded to years of diplomatic wounds, quiet disrespect, and overlooked grievances in the only language that true power understands, which is policy. They rejected deals, rewrote alliances, challenged diplomatic narratives, questioned aid, and in doing so, they didn't just embarrass the legacy of Donald Trump. They reshaped the very foundations of the U.S.-Caribbean relations. So what really happened in 2025 that forced the world's most powerful country to sit up and pay attention to two island nations? In this video, let's find out. In early 2025, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica shattered a decades-long pattern of polite compliance that had defined the Caribbean's relationship with Washington. They didn't beg for meetings. They didn't water down statements for Western comfort. They made decisions which were bold, calculated, and unapologetic, that reverberated far beyond their shores. For the first time in recent history, two small island nations stood up to the United States, not as dependents, but as equals. No theatrics, no bluster. Just raw sovereignty, executed with precision. First, let's talk about Trinidad and Tobago's move, which was seismic. In January, U.S. officials, backed by powerful Houston-based energy firms, approached the Rowley government with a renegotiation package that, on the surface, offered hundreds of millions in investment in exchange for expanded access to the country's lucrative natural gas reserves. But upon closer inspection, the proposal read like a one-sided surrender. Key clauses would allow U.S. firms to bypass local content laws, meaning American companies could flood the sector with their own labor, sidestepping hiring quotas that guarantee jobs for Trinidadians. Worse, the contracts granted exclusive profit protections enforceable under U.S. court jurisdiction, not regional arbitration mechanisms like the Caribbean Court of Justice or even international neutral tribunals. These weren't just bad terms. They were legal landmines designed to shift regulatory power offshore. The timing of the proposal was also calculated. With global energy markets still recalibrating post-COVID and amid climate transition debates, Trinidad's gas infrastructure was in high demand. American lobbyists thought they had leverage, but they misjudged Prime Minister Keith Rowley. In a nationally televised address that aired during prime time across all major Caribbean networks, he said, "Trinidad and Tobago will not mortgage its sovereignty to any multinational regardless of flag. Our energy does not belong to Washington. It belongs to the people of this republic." That sentence sent shockwaves. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an indictment of a relationship that had taken Trinidad's strategic value for granted for far too long. The government went further. Within 48 hours, they published the U.S. offer verbatim in the Trinidad Guardian, complete with annotated comments from legal and energy advisors. The document revealed how U.S. corporations wanted to impose non-compete clauses on Trinidad's ability to engage with regional partners like Brazil and Venezuela, a clause described by one energy analyst as an economic choke collar masquerading as investment. But Trinidad didn't just say no. It said yes to itself. The Rowley administration immediately signed a trilateral energy cooperation framework with Brazil and Guyana, two rising players in South America's resource economy. The deal laid out plans for joint refining capacity in Paramaribo, green hydrogen pilot projects in eastern Guyana, and carbon capture trials off the coast of southern Trinidad. More critically, it locked in mutual respect clauses. ensuring all partners retained regulatory authority over their respective energy assets. The message was crystal clear. Trinidad no longer saw the U.S. as indispensable. This was the first major petroleum agreement in Caribbean history that deliberately excluded American involvement. The move was historic. Newspapers in Caracas and São Paulo praised Trinidad's courage. Within CARICOM, smaller nations like St. Lucia and Antigua began exploring similar partnerships with Brazil and China. Trinidad had lit a spark. Meanwhile, Jamaica was fighting a different battle, and doing it with equal audacity. In February, a leaked memo from U.S. immigration enforcement revealed a plan to escalate deportations of Caribbean nationals, specifically referencing elevated visa violation risks from countries like Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica. The language, cloaked in administrative neutrality, was read by Jamaican officials as a thinly veiled racial profiling directive. Prime Minister Andrew Holness didn't wait. In a surprise press conference on the steps of Gordon House, he condemned the memo as ethno-nationalism in bureaucratic disguise. He summoned the U.S. ambassador for explanation, filed a diplomatic complaint through the Organization of American States, and stated clearly, Jamaicans abroad deserve dignity, not profiling. But Jamaica wasn't finished. Within 72 hours of the immigration scandal, Holness stood before Parliament and announced the government's formal move to make Jamaica a republic, a constitutional milestone that would remove King Charles III as Jamaica's head of state, replacing him with a locally elected ceremonial president. While discussions around republicanism had been circulating since Barbados took that step in 2021, no one expected the sudden acceleration. This wasn't just anti-monarchical, it was anti-subjugation, a public signal that Jamaica would no longer operate under foreign symbolism, foreign pressure, or foreign arrogance. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the Commonwealth. British media reacted with surprise. U.S. analysts wondered whether it was directed at them too. It was. Holness's speech made no attempt to hide that this was also about U.S. disrespect. In his words, "We are not just separating from crowns, we are separating from systems that treat small nations as pawns. Jamaica is not a pawn." And then came Washington's classic retaliation, a travel advisory. The U.S. State Department issued a Level 3 warning, citing crime in Jamaica's urban centers and advising Americans to reconsider travel. This advisory, updated just days after the Republic announcement, was seen by many in Jamaica as a diplomatic slap designed to undercut the country's tourism-dependent economy. But instead of panic, Jamaica responded with a strategy. Within 10 days, the Holness administration launched an unprecedented public diplomacy campaign titled Real Jamaica. The Ministry of Tourism invited over 20 international journalists from the BBC, Al Jazeera, France 24, and even travel TikTok influencers to personally tour Jamaica's most popular cities, visiting not just resorts, but community centers, police innovation zones, startup incubators, and youth training academies. Videos of real Jamaicans explaining their work, their dreams, and their safety initiatives flooded social media. Influencers shared authentic moments, showing farmers in St. Elizabeth, artists in Trenchtown, and young coders in Kingston. The narrative shifted quickly. The campaign was a success. Google searches for vacation in Jamaica spiked by 28% in 1 week. Jamaica didn't just defend itself. It went on the diplomatic offensive, showing that small nations can control their narrative and protect their economy without foreign permission. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. Together, Trinidad and Jamaica's actions formed a coordinated wave of resistance, not against trade, not against diplomacy, but against unequal relationships. These were not emotional reactions. These were deliberate national recalibrations, a resetting of how power, respect, and cooperation are defined in the 21st century. They didn't call press conferences to ask for dignity. They enacted it. But why? Well, to understand why Trinidad and Jamaica decided to take an open public stand in 2025, you have to look at the years of quiet disrespect, broken promises, and deliberate sidelining that came before. During Donald Trump's first presidency between 2017 and 2020, the U.S. didn't just downgrade its foreign policy priorities. It reordered the global hierarchy, with transactional loyalty at the top and multilateral partnerships at the bottom. Caribbean nations, which had spent decades building stable relations with Washington, suddenly found themselves on the discard pile. And the damage wasn't just emotional, it was operational. Between 2017 and 2020, foreign aid to the Caribbean region was slashed by more than 30%. While that might sound like belt-tightening to policymakers in D.C., for Caribbean nations, where U.S. funds supported essential services like public health clinics, hurricane recovery logistics, and youth violence prevention, this was a matter of life and death. In Jamaica, these cuts specifically hit the PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief Program, where U.S. technical support had previously ensured the availability of HIV medications, testing kits, and community outreach programs. By 2019, over half a dozen rural health clinics in Manchester and Clarendon reported interruptions in the delivery of antiretrovirals due to logistical gaps caused by aid cuts. In Trinidad, the story unfolded through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which had provided support to law enforcement reform, youth outreach, and gun interdiction in gang-prone areas like Laventille and Chaguanas. With U.S. assistance abruptly withdrawn by 2018, youth mentorship programs lost vital resources. An entire initiative aimed at reducing school dropouts in East Port of Spain was shuttered. Meanwhile, gun-related homicides in those same zones rose by 11% the following year. But aid wasn't the only weapon of disengagement. The immigration crackdown under Trump turned these nations from partners into suspects. In 2018, changes to U.S. immigration enforcement included the dramatic expansion of expedited removal, allowing ICE officers to deport individuals without a hearing if they couldn't immediately prove legal entry. Caribbean nationals, especially Jamaicans and Trinidadians in New York, Miami, and Houston, were disproportionately affected. One Trinidadian technician, Leon Boudrum, who had lived in Texas for 14 years, was detained and deported despite being in the process of renewing his work visa. In another widely publicized case, a Jamaican nurse, Marva Ricketts, was deported after 18 years in the U.S. over a clerical error, leaving behind 2 U.S.-born children in foster care. In both cases, consulates were informed after deportations occurred. The message was unmistakable. Caribbean lives were disposable. The trauma spread beyond families. Consulates in Miami and New York were overwhelmed, unprepared to receive deportees who often arrived with no identification, no resources, and no family contacts. The U.S. had turned a lawful migration relationship into a pipeline of human dumping and refused to acknowledge the cultural or political cost. Then came the insult that couldn't be explained away: Trump's infamous shithole countries comment during a closed-door immigration policy meeting in 2018. While his administration denied it, multiple senators confirmed that the remark was made in reference to Haiti, African nations, and the Caribbean. The blow to national pride was instant and deep. In Jamaica, cultural leaders like Professor Carolyn Cooper called the moment a racial slap heard across the diaspora. Prime Minister Holness canceled attendance at a D.C. donor forum. In Trinidad, university students marched in solidarity with Haiti and Barbados, holding signs that read, "We are not your shithole. We are your history." The resentment dug in deeper when the Trump administration blocked a natural gas processing deal between Trinidad and Venezuela in 2020. The deal, which involved no arms, no politics, and only LNG, was halted on the grounds that it could help prop up the Maduro regime. The consequence? Trinidad lost billions in revenue and shelved major plant expansions in its Point Lisas industrial estate, all to maintain American sanctions logic. Even though Trinidad stood to gain clean energy cooperation and regional energy security, it was told, without negotiation, to walk away. There was no alternative offered, no compensation for lost growth. Just a one-way instruction from the United States: obey. So by 2025, the mood had shifted. Neither nation would be silent again. Trinidad didn't just reject an oil deal, it exposed it. The public release of the U.S. proposal, clause by clause, revealed a blueprint of neocolonial control dressed in corporate language. The response from the public was volcanic, not anti-American, but pro-Trinidadian. Furthermore, Jamaica's move toward republicanism wasn't just symbolic. The new constitutional language bars foreign diplomatic agents from sitting on any state advisory boards, a direct rebuke of reports that Trump-era U.S. diplomats had tried to influence Jamaica's UN voting on Israel and Cuba by offering increased development aid. You see, what Trinidad and Jamaica did in 2025 changed everything. It wasn't just a headline. It wasn't just a moment. It was a shift in global posture. These weren't two angry nations reacting out of emotion. They were two sovereign states acting out of memory and principle. And the world noticed. Because here's the truth. For too long, small nations have been conditioned to play it safe, to remain quiet in exchange for loans, grants, military cooperation, and access to diplomatic circles. And during Trump's presidency, countries like Trinidad and Jamaica learned a painful lesson that silence, even loyalty, doesn't guarantee respect. They watched as their aid was cut, their citizens deported, their trade options manipulated, and their identities dismissed with one crude, racist remark about shithole countries. They remembered the broken promises. They remembered the humiliation. And by 2025, they decided to remember loudly. So when Trinidad rejected the U.S. proposed energy deal that undermined its regulatory power, and when Jamaica fast-tracked its break from the British monarchy and launched a diplomatic media offensive in response to an unjust U.S. travel advisory, it wasn't just about optics. It was about narrative control. What Trinidad and Jamaica did was simple but powerful. They refused to submit. They refused to keep playing a game where only big players win. They gave Trump and the system that enabled him a reality check. And maybe even more striking, they exposed other nations. They raised a hard, uncomfortable question. If these two small island nations can stand up to America's most unpredictable former president, then what's stopping everyone else? That question hit especially hard in places like Canada, the UK, and even parts of the EU. Countries that claim to champion values but folded under Trump's threats, tariffs, and insults. Meanwhile, two Caribbean nations with far fewer resources found the courage to say no. So yes, what Trinidad and Jamaica did changed the game. They didn't need to be superpowers. They only needed to realize they were powerful enough to say enough. And once that happened, the rest of the world had no choice but to pay attention. Do you think Trinidad and Jamaica did the right thing by pushing back against U.S. pressure, even if it risks economic consequences? Was Donald Trump's treatment of the Caribbean just bad policy, or was it a deliberate show of disrespect? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on whether the Caribbean should start forming deeper alliances with countries like Brazil, China, and South Africa, instead of relying on the US and the UK. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.